Greetings duelists and welcome to another video. So YCS Niagra has happened this weekend. Not only was it our first YCS like in the current season, well the second if you want to count like the one that happened on Cancun. However, this YCS is a little bit more significant because it is the first event post Rage of the Abyss. So, a few things to note. Rage of the Abyss is a game-changing set. This card, this set introduced like very powerful cards like Fuwalos, Dominus Impulse, new Fire King support. Centurion's also really good because of it. And as you can see here on the screen, this is the top 32. I have the decks here lined up. And I will talk about them in a little bit. First I want to talk about like the performance of these decks and how did we get here. So we see Snake Eye Azamina in 9 spots. We see Jubel in 5. We see Tenpai in 5. We see Fire King Snake Eye Azamina in 4. We see Rescue Ace Azamina in 3. And then we have one of Sky Striker, Labyrinth, Visual Beast, Sun Avalon, Exodia, and Bestial Centurion. I want to talk about Azamina first because even though it is scattered, half of the top 32 were all Snake Eye Azamina variants. And I don't think it comes to a complete surprise. I think the Azamina engine is really strong. Like, imagine what happened when the Sinful Spells engine got introduced in like Age of Overlord. Now think about that, but to a stronger degree. That's what happened with Azamina. Rescue Ace became a really good deck again because of it. Fire Kings has really natural synergy with it as well. Like, just Snake Eye decks in general have done very well just because of the Azamina engine. But that's not the only thing that made these fire decks also really strong. The other thing that makes this convincing for a lot of players is Dominus Impulse. I keep saying that Dominus Impulse is like the best card like in the set. Obviously, Fuwalos like is a card that is a little bit more impactful like across the board, but because it can be played in a lot more strategies, it is just fairly generic. However, Dominus Impulse, impact-wise, as a hand trap, is probably one of the best hand traps in the game right now. Any deck that can play Impulse should be playing Impulse. And this goes back to like the other decks that are like on the top of the ladder. Labyrinth topped and it played Impulse, and it made it all the way to top 4. One of the Tenpai players made it all the way to top 4. It also was playing Impulse. All the Fire King variants and all the Rescue Ace variants were also playing it. I'll talk about Sky Striker in a little bit, but in more detail. But Sky Striker is one deck that I did not think about that can also play Dominus Impulse. So this just goes back to like what I was talking about. Like, any deck that can play this card, it's just an automatic shoo-in. Now let's talk about Fiendsmith. Prior to this YCS, Fiendsmith variants or Fiendsmith hybrid decks, or more specifically Jubel, were very strong. However, we do not see a lot of Fiendsmith variants in topping decks. Like, there is a chance some of these Azamina Snake Eye decks are playing Fiendsmith, but not all of them. And that comes to like a lot of explanations. The first thing to understand when it comes to Fiendsmith is you cannot play this engine alongside Dominus Impulse. Dominus Impulse freezes you from using light monster effects if you use the effect from the hand, meaning that Fiendsmith just significantly loses value. The other thing that makes Fiendsmith very questionable to be played in your strategy is Fuwalos. Like, Fuwalos is a card that just really battles out the engine because this is an extra deck reliant engine, and it also summons cards from the main deck. So that automatically already gives a lot of pressure to Fiendsmith. Now, let's talk about the rogue decks for a little bit. Or, well, some of them you can call rogue, some of them you can call actual like contenders. Let's start with some Avalon. This is a deck that is probably the deck with the highest ceiling out of all the decks that have topped. However, this deck cannot play Impulse. That is the first thing to mention. The other thing to mention about this deck is it's weak to Impulse, it's weak to both more charming monsters. Like, this format is very questionable for a strategy like Plants. That's not to say that you won't do well with it if you know what you're doing, or if you don't encounter against those cards, or if you find a strategy in your game plan. So kudos to this one player who actually topped with it. Same thing goes for Ritual Beast. I did see Cecilia's deck profile. Her Ritual Beast deck is pretty much the same as mine, with 6 card difference. Instead of playing Talents, she played Dark Ruler no more, and she also played Ash Blossom in the main deck. That's pretty much the only difference. Everything else is pretty much the same. Like, Ritual Beast, the thing that Ritual Beast has going for it is that it's the best deck out of all the decks in this category that can play Dimension Shifter. And yes, you can make the argument for Tempai Dragons also being a shifter deck, but the deck that can use it the most optimally is Ritual Beast. And yes, this deck is weak to both Molch Armies and is weak to Impulse, but if you resolve Shifter against opponents who have those cards, all you have to do is just put up a decent board against those decks, and you should be able to control the game, because Shifter is just as powerful as all those other cards. The other thing this deck has going for it is that to this day people are not knowledgeable how to face against it, and that also gives it a very strong advantage. I think the same thing goes for Millennium as well. This deck is a deck that not many people know about and how it can be properly played. If you really want to see this deck in action, I highly suggest like DB Grinder videos. I think he showcased a player that was playing this deck like religiously and was doing very well in the DB ladder. I really like Rescue Ace right now. I already brought up Rescue Ace like with Azamina. I did do like a deck explanation on that as well, so feel free to just scroll in my channel to find it. I called it. I knew Rescue Ace was gonna be good again, and it proved well. Like 3 people topped with it, so yeah, I don't think this is the last time we'll see Rescue Ace. This deck also plays well into Fuwalos. It's a deck that can play Dominus Impulse, and it's probably one of the better Impulse decks, because this deck does play a lot of trap cards. So that just gives you more value to Impulse, like as a hand trap. Let's talk about other decks that did super well because of their position and people's knowledge. Let's start with Centurion. So, Pac went undefeated in Swiss, like playing this deck. As you can see in the title, it says 10-0. I spoke to Pac a little bit offline and like asked them about a few choices. If you've been on this channel and if you've seen my content for the past year, you already know I was very high up on this deck. Like, Centurion is one of the most really good choices right now. It's a deck that I highly respect for this format. The ceiling behind the deck is not super incredible. However, it plays well into both more charmies. Sadly, it cannot play Impulse, but it's a deck that can play a lot of non-engine. It's a deck that can do very well under simplified game state. Like summoning the Shooting Blazar is like incredibly strong. Also, Primera Primus is just a very very strong card. Like I think this card gave this deck the push that it needed to actually be in higher tier contention. So right now I think this is a really good format for Centurion. So the one deck I want to talk about that pretty much caught everyone by surprise, most likely, is Ryan Yu's take on Sky Striker. So I never showcased it on this channel, but I have been experimenting with Sky Strikers for a fair bit prior to this event. Like my variant is very very different. I was just testing a lot of stuff, but we can see like I was playing the Azamina engine in here. I think the Azamina is really good in Sky Striker. You can just end on Ilya Silva as one of your interruptions, and this card can put itself off the board, which just opens your spot for your like Sky Striker spell and traps. Like Chart Cannon is really good this format. This deck can do very well in a game where we don't have as oppressive boss monsters anymore. So Ryan Yu's list was very different. Like he opted to play 35 spell cards. I don't know how many are in this list. I think I have 42. Yeah, but this is a 60 card list, so that's fair to note. But the one thing I did not take into consideration, and I already spoke about it earlier, is this deck can play Dominus Impulse very properly. Like, if we look at the deck, what does Dominus Impulse actually stop in Sky Striker? It freezes Hayate's Foolish Burial effect. It stops Kaina's effect from like freezing a monster. But that's about it. Like, it does not stop Kagari, it does not stop Shizuku, it does not stop Zeke, it does not stop Ray. So Sky Striker is one of the better decks that can play Dominus Impulse. The other really good advantageous thing about Sky Striker is it forces player to play awkwardly into it, because when you're going second with this deck, a lot of people will be playing under the mentality that you're playing Tempai Dragons, and this deck plays very very different from Tempai Dragons. Like the way this deck wins is not by OTKing you, is by dwindling your resources, and like you have enough tools to just make it work very very well. The other thing the Sky Striker has to their advantage is like you don't care about Fuwalos that much. Hand traps don't really do a lot against this deck unless it's like Shifter and Droll and Lockbird. Like those are like the two main outliers. Outside of those cards, like you don't have to worry about hand traps when it comes to this deck, which is the same thing to think about when you're playing Centurion. This deck really doesn't care about hand traps that much, which is why it did so very well. This deck, like the way Ryan Yu constructed the deck, like they play a lot of anti-Tempai cards, so you don't have to worry about Tempai Dragons if you're going first. Against a lot of decks, if you're going first, you just play a lot of these strong cards that just like end the turn. Like DDG and Barrier just ends the turn immediately, and with 3 copies of Triple Tactic Thrust, which is arguably better in this deck than any other deck in the game, like you just have a lot going to your advantage. So the winner of the event was Landon Oliver with his Fire King Azamina Snake Eye deck. I already spoke about my thoughts on that deck, like in my deck profile, but I guess I'll go a little bit more in depth. I think when it comes to like Azamina variants, or at least Snake Eye Azamina decks, I think this engine is really really strong. I think for the first weekend, like debuting Radio the Abyss, this deck was very very well positioned. But now I fear for this deck, and I fear for its variants, because now people are going to pretty much prepare for them, like Impulse, Fuwalos, Retaliating Sea, like Ghost Over Snow Rabbit. All these cards are really good against the Azamina engine. Like I think it's only a matter of time until people like adapt properly. So the last deck I forgot to mention, talk about, and I kind of want to talk about this deck a little bit more, is Labyrinth. I did a video the moment Rage of the Abyss was about to debut in the OCG, and I said in that video that I think Labyrinth is very well positioned into this format, and the deck made it all the way to top 4. Like I saw Ryan Cardigan's list. I saw a few of his games. I think Ryan did a lot of questionable plays with this deck. However, the way the deck is actually constructed is actually genius. One card that's really strong in this deck now, because of Impulse, is the Labyrinth spell card. Like the Labyrinth field spell, this card is ridiculously strong because of Impulse. Adding to that, like I think the furniture build is the best way to play it right now. Like outside of Bestials, there's not a lot you have to worry about with this deck. This deck is also a deck that can play Moch armies also very efficiently. It can play against the Moch armies also very efficiently. You do have to worry about Impulse, because Impulse is another bullet card against you, because it stops the welcome traps. But outside of that, I think this deck is going to be done well. Tenpai Dragons did very well also. I don't want to talk about Tenpai Dragons that much, because at the end of the day, this is a very high rolly deck. There's no real way for me to quantify how strong Tenpai is just on how it's done with deck building. It's more about player interactions and drawing the right cards. This is pretty much like the sackiest deck in the format right now. But yeah, that has been my talk involving like the YCS. I hope you found this informative to your liking and understanding. More content coming soon. Keep practicing and keep dueling.